before we head out on bikes. One of them is today we're going to try and focus a little bit on the local effects of climate change. And if you remember, we talked about last week how the temperature, right, so temperatures in Maine have risen, if you look at the 100-year average, right, last year was about 3.3 degrees above that 100-year average, which doesn't sound like much. When you start looking in context, this is a graph that shows the 10 hottest years on record globally. So out of the past, 100, 120 years. This shows the 10 hottest years, and every single one of them has been in the last 15 years. So look at 2019, which is when the last data I could find was, and 2019 was the second hottest year ever in the history of recorded global temperature that's ever been recorded, right? If we look at the trends within Maine, we are on average for the past 20 years, so since 2000 to 2020, for the past 20 years, Maine has on average been 3 degrees warmer than the 100-year average, which is a significant amount. One of the big things that we're going to talk about today is, I'm going to skip that graph. These are all so tiny, it's ridiculous. But the big thing that I want to talk about today is this very small graph right here that you can't really see. But basically, this shows precipitation. And all those lines show an increase in precipitation. And what this graph is showing us is that in Maine, right, during the winter, the part that's blue, we're going to see an increase, right, of about an inch or so. No, that's not an inch, sorry. Yeah, about an inch per month increase in precipitation in the winter, right? So in the winter time, each month is going to see an increase of about an inch. So if temperatures are getting warmer and winters are getting wetter, you might at first blush say, oh, that's great, it means we'll have more snow. But if temperatures are getting warmer, that means we're not predicted to have more snow. We're predicted to have what kind of precipitation events in the wintertime? Rain. And I'm sure these past 2 or 3 winters have taught us, like, you know, there's the normal January thaw and things like that, but there have been a significant amount of rainstorms the past 2 or 3 winters. And when you look at the other side of this chart, the part that's in yellow, what's interesting is all of a sudden that precipitation line drops down. And that part in yellow are the summer months. So overall, even though Maine is going to get wetter and get more precipitation, you think, oh, that's great, right? At least that means, like, we're not going to worry about running out of water. We're going to have plenty of drinking water and you know, be able to irrigate and things like that. So even though we're projected to be wetter, and New England is considered a water-safe area as opposed to the arid western United States, most of that precipitation is going to be taking place in the winter. And if you look at the summer, all those projections are now down. So the new normal is going to be wetter, rainier winters and warmer, drier summers. So think big storms followed by big drought, followed by big storms, followed by big drought. And just anecdotally, I can tell you that that's the trend that I feel like I've seen in the past 3 or 4 years. Currently, about 2/3 of the state of Maine is abnormally dry, or in drought conditions, considered abnormally dry. And today, I thought it'd be interesting to hop on bikes and head over to Swans Falls Dam, because that's a local area, right, that's right here, that directly has to deal with huge storm surges and in periods of drought, right? If you run a dam, those river levels are tied directly to those events. So that'll be interesting to hop on those bikes, head to the dam, and look at how that might affect the dam and then the greater region in general. that is our plan for the morning. I think the next thing we probably need to figure out are bikes and helmets. Right, so 3 pillars, cornerstones of the Freiburg community. So we're gonna look at it from an angle of like power generation / economic. We're gonna look at it from a agricultural economic angle, and then we're gonna look at it from a recreation economic angle. What do you think that the tying line is between all 3 of those things I just said? Between recreation, agriculture, and power. What was that tying thread? Oh, yeah, absolutely, the river. The river is absolutely going to be a tying thread.
The answer to 9 out of 10 questions.
And the other going to be money, right? It's going to be economics. And I think whether right or wrong, most people will not or have not taken environmental concerns such as climate change seriously unless you put a price tag on them, right? And connect them to the economy. That's typically what's going to motivate lawmakers more, as well as the general public. So we're going to start out here at Swans Falls. Is going to be our first stop. So let's head out over this way towards the dam. We're going to do a brief thing about the dam, just a brief overview about the dam, and then we're going to do some critical thinking to tie some skills together. Those big Obermeyer pneumatic press gates, right? Those big baffles that get inflated that run right there, that either rise it up or lower it so it is full of air. You can see water spilling over the course of the rocks over here. This big yellow thing here is called a leaf boom, and that just scoops up leaves, right? So you can imagine, I mean, look at these trees, and you can imagine all the things that come down the river that you wouldn't want going through the turbines, right? They wouldn't want going into this building. So it's called a leaf boom. It just helps filter out and sweep some of those big things out so it doesn't go through. This section right here in front of us is called the intake canal, and this is the area that actually creates power. And what's interesting is I didn't know this. I assumed it was from the water flowing, but the dam operator before me was telling me that it's actually from water dropping. So what happens is that water right there, right where it enters, it drops, and it's the force of the water dropping that actually turns the turbines and creates the energy. This is this station is a 1 megawatt, is that right? What I said? Yeah, this is a 1 megawatt station. This is how much power it can produce. And what's interesting is, so it creates DC, direct current, which isn't usable, so it has to go through transformers to get turned into AC. And then, what do you notice? Not air conditioning, but like alternative current. What do you notice? I heard someone be like, AC. Where do these power lines run? Do they run to Freiburg? No, where do they run? New Hampshire. They run to New Hampshire. So it's super interesting. I didn't know this either. So this dam, Swans Falls, was built in the 1940s. And when it was built, the state of New Hampshire was paying more for electricity than the state of Maine. And so when the infrastructure was built, they decided to sell the electricity across state lines. So all the power here actually that's generated goes to PSNH, which is an electric company in New Hampshire. And it doesn't, and maybe some of that might serve parts of Maine, but for the most part, it goes across state lines. So that was like super, super interesting.
Do you know how far the water actually drops from these turbines?
You know, I don't know how far it drops to turn those turbines. Do you know, Mr. Oliver?
When you're done, I can talk. Are you going to talk about last spring and what happened here?
I was going to mention that.
Because, I mean, and when he gets done talking, I'm going to guess about 12 feet. And we'll hear why I think 12 feet in a little bit. Good question.
So, here's what I want you to do. In a minute, I want you to find a partner and based on some of the numbers I kind of threw at you earlier when we were standing outside of your school about changing temperatures, changing climate, and those graphs. I know it was really quickly, but what I want you to think about is, based on what we heard earlier, how would that affect Swans Falls? How might that affect Swans Falls? Based on those, we talked about up and then way down, and we talked about up and then way down. So what effect might that have on Swans Falls, and therefore what effect might that have on the broader area? Okay?
Find someone you haven't talked to yet today.
Does anyone not understand what's being asked right now? It's okay if you don't. Okay? Warmer, wetter winters, longer, drier summers. So what effect might that have? What do you think? It would definitely affect, yeah. So having those lower water levels might affect some of the plants or animals that rely along the kind of area of the river.
We'll have to hear some new voices too. There's low water and there's not a lot of rainfall that can affect like the power.
It could absolutely, right? It could affect the power generation. So how much power can get produced by this station?
In the winter, since it rains a lot more, the top of the water will most likely be frozen in the winter, and it'll just all be washed off.
Oh, okay. So maybe affecting. So maybe when the river freezes over, having that less of it freezing might affect something. Yeah, is it?
On the drier summer, so the water evaporates more, so it lowers the level.
Yeah. So you're gonna have that's right. So not only you're not getting rain to replenish, right, but you're also having more evaporation take place. That's good.
We kind of said that there'd be like a lot of big dips where you have too much water and then like not enough because of how it's getting warmer and wetter.
So that's great. So what's gonna happen if you're having these huge dips and these big surges? What could potentially happen to your infrastructure here, right? So, whoa, everything all at once. Whoa, everything all at once. What could potentially happen? What happens when you have a big storm that rips through? Power outages, break stuff. They had damage?
They had significant damage.
Yeah, significant damage. Do you want to talk about that for a
Sure.
second?
So, behind me in the spillway, actually the wall that's like right behind me, right? Do you see where there's water and it drops off? So, last year, in the spring, decent water going down the Saco, and a log came through and just busted that wall. Now, granted, the wall that was put in years ago really wasn't put in that well, but still, it busted the wall. So then the dam was inoperable all spring, summer, and into the fall. What happened is naturally then recreation was affected. Phoebe, do you remember the rocks? So if we were to go down there to the canoe portage, you'd be like, Mr. Oliver, what rocks? Upstream, the water went and dropped 12, sometimes 15 feet. That's pretty a lot. Imagine a basketball hoop and then a half a basketball hoop. The water's not there. They couldn't make power. It was, I'm sorry, I'm going to say funny, watching canoers trying to portage. There were canoers that would go beyond the buoys. They would ignore the buoys because there wasn't signage, and they'd get really close to the dam. And they'd be like, I think I might be able to, no, I can't make this. And then have to make their way back upstream. It was a major deal. So no power, the portage to drag your canoe. You weren't just dragging it along this. Now you had to go along these massive rocks. I would imagine if you went to Weston's Beach last year, you noticed there was a lot of beach. The river was very, very low. Oh, Benny, behind your house. The river did not flow behind Benny's house. There was no water behind Benny's house. And sadly, many of you don't know where Benny lives.
Is that an old course?
No, he lives on the new course. He lives where Benny lives is where the Saco always flows. Because the water was so low, Benny lives on kind of like what will probably in 50, 100 years will be an oxbow, okay? The Saco decided, well, it's so low, I'm going to take this shortcut. And all the water went through the shortcut, leaving behind Benny's house and across the street from you, Tori, bone dry. It's really interesting.
So Swans Falls is the first of 12 dams that are on the Saco River.
How many, Mike?
12!
12? That sounds like a number. That sounds important.
From starting in Freiburg and going down to Bedford, there are 12 dams along the Saco, most of which, not all, but most of which are still used for hydroelectricity. So let's add some things together then. I mean, I know that we said this one goes over to New Hampshire, but they don't all, right? They don't all, like the ones in Bedford don't run all the way over to New Hampshire. So let's think about this. If we have these huge storm surges that knock out these big concrete walls, what are you gonna have to do to those walls? Rebuild them. And that's gonna cost a lot of money. Now, this is owned by a private company. Is that private company just gonna eat that loss and say, oh well, we're gonna spend a couple $1 million fixing this, but we'll still sell electricity at the same price? No, that private company, what they'll end up eventually having to do, right? If you think about it, if this is a reoccurring event, and every year we start to have more of these huge surges and storm events, eventually that infrastructure cost is gonna go up, which means the price to the consumer is going to go up. So eventually, right, the cost of power, your cost of power will increase. And those are one of those kind of connect the dot things that sometimes people have a hard time in thinking about with climate change. They might say, oh, it's 2 degrees warmer, who cares, right? So maybe some tree that grows here can't grow here anymore. But when you open up that bill from the power company, and it's like, oh, there's a lot more money than I used to pay, right? That's when it starts to have more effects. Yep.
I just wanted to throw in on that New Hampshire, for those of you that live in New Hampshire and those of you that go over the border to grandma's house or whatnot, New Hampshire has one of the highest electric rates in the entire country. People pay more for their electric bill in New Hampshire than almost anywhere else. So it's really worthwhile if you're in New Hampshire to think about alternative energy sources. My sister, who lives in Florida, where the sun is always shining, I said, where are all the solar panels? Why isn't everyone in Florida on solar? Her answer was, electric is so dirt cheap. There's no incentive for personal households to invest in solar because it's already dirt cheap. So it's something to really think about, is why the big disparity? Why isn't everyone kind of going in that direction? It just makes sense.
My parents live in South Texas, and electricity in Texas is super cheap. And it was they put solar panels to our house. My parents' house in Texas is fully solar powered, PV, photovoltaic. But it was at a big loss because they didn't have any of the rebates, they didn't have any of the incentives, and they don't make a whole lot of money selling it back to the grid because the electricity is like dirt cheap there as well. So big takeaway from Swans Falls in regards to climate change, right? Is you look at those graphs and you think warmer, drier summers, wetter winters are going to cause an infrequent flows and high storm surges that would damage infrastructure, provide unreliable power due to the rising and falling of the water, and that cost would eventually get passed on to consumers. So that's the big takeaway wrap up. Does that make sense to everybody? Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Sure. So, warmer, drier summers and wetter, warmer winters will change the level and flow of the Saco, creating periods of surges and I don't know, low points, what's the word I'm looking for here? And low water, yeah, inconsistencies. That can damage infrastructure and provide unreliable power needs, right? Because if it's like really high part of the year and really low part of the year, you got to manage that. And that will pass on costs, right? Higher costs to the consumer. And you don't need to write down every single word I'm saying, but like kind of pick out those big pieces, right? Infrastructure damage, inconsistent power, consumer cost goes up, right? Those are the kind of the big pieces your brain should take away. So if you looked at your notes later, you could still remember, right? And it all has to do with kind of that rising and dropping of the Saco. And what I want to do in a minute here is we're going to walk back to where our bikes and backpacks are, and we're going to do a quick thing looking at the river to give you a sense of what the water level is like today, right now. Does anyone not understand the connection with Swans Falls, climate change, and the economy? Does anyone not understand that? Awesome. All right, is the depth of the Saco. And the discharge rate, so the depth is 3.1 today, the discharge rate is measured in cubic feet per second. Cubic feet per second. And so here's what I want you to do. Pick a spot somewhere on the other side of the riverbank, right? So just pick a spot somewhere on the other side of the riverbank and just imagine a line from you to that spot, right? Like almost like if I took a rope and threw it across the Saco River, right? So for me, I'm gonna look at that down tree right there, and I'm gonna picture a line that runs from that down tree to me, all right? You can even hold out your hand if you want to. If that's a better visual, you can hold out your hand like this. In fact, let's all do that. That's a better visual. Hold out your hand. So does everyone see, if you look down at the Saco, how there's some water that's going from the left side of your hand to the right side of your hand as it moves downstream? All right. So everyone, look at the Saco. Now look at the water and one Mississippi. In that 1 second, about 350 cubic feet of water moved down from the left side to the right side of your hand. 350 cubic feet. 350. To give you an idea of what that means, right? Let's pick your spot. So 350 cubic feet. Pick your spot again. All right, watch that water go from the left side of your hand to the right side of your hand. A cubic foot is like a basketball. So in 1 second, 350 basketballs full of water will have gone from the left side to the right side of your hand. Ready? 1 Mississippi, 350 feet. 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi, 5 Mississippi, 6 Mississippi, 7 Mississippi, 8 Mississippi, 9 Mississippi, 10 Mississippi. In that time, 3,500 basketballs full of water went from the left side to the right side of your hand. That's a lot of water, right? I mean, think about a basketball. If someone took that basketball and dumped that water on your head, you'd be like, that's so much water, I'm soaking wet. Now imagine 350 of those hovering above your head, right? So that is the discharge rate for today. The median, is there anyone here that can tell me what median means? Does anyone talk about this in math? A voice I haven't heard. A voice I have not heard yet today. It's not the average. It's not the average. Median is not the average. It's like, yeah, it's like the exact middle, right? They take the high, the low, and it's the middle. The median for today is about 1,000 cubic feet. 1,000 basketballs full of water should be traveling every second from the left to the right side of your hand, which means that approximately, how much lower is the water now than it should be? Like 3 times lower, right? It's like, right now, if you look at that, we should have 3 times the amount of water moving down the Saco River. So the water is really, really low. The water is very, very low right now. So today is 350. It should be about 1,000. I should mention that these numbers are for Conway. This morning, when I looked, which was 4 hours ago, roughly, so in another 2 hours, that water will be here. It takes about 6 hours from the water to get from Conway to here, which is kind of funny to think about it. Mr. Cormier, the person that runs the plant, was telling me, the dam was telling me that if they have, it can be completely sunny, no rain here in Freiburg, but they might have a big thunderstorm up in the notches, and 12 hours later, exactly 12 hours later, they'll see that water move through here as it makes its way down. So, what I want to just impress on you is, last question, why, who can tell me, why should the water be so much higher right now? Why would the water still be, why would we expect the water to still be around 1,000? Why should it still be really high this time of year?
Voice we haven't heard. Voice,
How about,
new
I haven't heard
voice.
anything from these 4 people in the back over here. How about 4 people right here?
Cassidy.
Cassidy, what do you think?
Maybe because like it's just
Snow melt, absolutely. So from snow melt and just from spring rain, right? Well, this is, they're calling this a second dry spring is the word that meteorologists are using, because we had a dry spring when the snow melt happened, and now we're still having more of a dry spring now. Like, we should be getting rain events like once every, like maybe like twice a week, like 1 or 2 times a week we should be having rain events. So yeah, absolutely, that's right, Cassidy. From snow melt and then just from precipitation in spring. All right, let's go ahead and in the demographic that I am now amongst, you know, one might think, you know, when you think of the Freiburg Fair, often our mind might go to like, oh yeah, like cotton candy in a zipper, right? Like Little Smokies. They call Little Smokies. What's the name of the carnival thing? Little Smokies.
Smokey's Greatest Show?
Smokey's Greatest Show.
Something?
Something like that.
Oh, is that like the rotating fairs?
That's who puts on the Midway?
Why is there a Freiburg Fair? Like what is really the core of the Freiburg Fair? Like what is it? Is it like mostly like food trucks and amusement rides, or what is the core of the Freiburg Fair? Right?
Agriculture.
Agriculture. Right? Agriculture. So here's what I want you to do. In thinking about climate trends, how can we apply that, or how might that affect agriculture and therefore the Freiburg Fair? So thinking about those same climate trends we just talked about, big surges, right? Wetter, warmer winters, less snowpack, longer, drier, more drought-filled summers. How could that affect agriculture, whether that's crops or livestock, and thereby affect the Freiburg Fair? So, find a partner, take a minute, and let's think about what you come up with. Today's a good critical thinking day. Okay, so longer, hotter summers means it's going to be harder to grow grains and feed crops, right, for livestock. Absolutely.
And there's like garden shows and like crop shows. They can't do as much as that, as much of those because in the summer when they're growing, there's not going to be as much water, so most of them will like die off.
Yeah, absolutely. And they have a whole building that's dedicated to like blue ribbon plants that you grow, right? Oh, may not be safe for animal transportation. These are all, a lot of these are ones I've not even heard of. That's great. Animals getting heat stroke. Say that again. Real loud, especially the part about if they can't come to the fair, then who else doesn't come to the fair? Say that again real loud. Absolutely. We're going to get to that in a second. That's great. Any other thoughts?
it's kind of off topic, but our garden, half of it's kind of in our yard, and then the back half is in a really wet part. So for the last 4 years, we can't get the tractor in there to till, but for the last 2 years, we've been able to get the tractor in there without it sinking. It's gotten that dry.
Interesting. Yep.
Droughts, that means that there is no more crops, and the cow and the other animals can't eat those crops, so they start dying, and we don't have any food left to eat.
Yeah. So let's think about it this way, right? You said warmer, wetter winters, drier summers. At its roots, this is an agricultural thing, right? So if you think about it, one, it's very water intensive. And two, if you get to a point, let's say that you have livestock. Let's say you have show livestock. It takes a lot of water, right? Whether that's through feed grain, right, feed crops, or whether that's through just what that animal needs to survive, right? It's a lot of water usage. So climate change essentially affects us here in Freiburg, Maine, right? We made it to 2 of them. Went to the dam and talked about the discharge rate of the river, right? And power generation. Went to there and talked about agricultural. The third stop was the third stop was just quickly, and I think Mr. Oliver talked about this already, but quickly checking in with recreation. So thinking about that there are, probably have noticed, there are quite a few between Conway and Freiburg. There probably are at least 10 canoe outfitters. I'd say at least 10 canoe outfitters. And you can imagine that if we're looking at longer, drier summers, if I am from Massachusetts, if I'm from Southern New Hampshire, and I think about, oh, it'd be so great to go paddle on the Saco and come up here, or just tube along and enjoy nature. You know what I don't want to do? Is probably show up in the middle of summer and have water so low that I'm dragging a canoe, right, through ankle-deep water, or just carrying my tube
And then it gets a hole.
down the Saco River. I'm sure, has anyone here ever had to do that before, like get a day on the Saco and end up like having to like push a canoe or carry a tube? Yeah, a couple people. Exactly. It's not a ton of fun, right? So if you think about it, if I'm from away, right, from somewhere else, I come up here, and all of a sudden, I end up carrying my tube, hauling my canoe for half the trip. I go home, and the only thing I tell people is like, oh man, this is terrible. I wouldn't go up there. I'd drag a tube with me the whole way, right? So, the Saco, not only is it, coursed through the center of Freiburg, sustaining us, whether that's through our drinking water, whether that's through our crops, irrigation, whether that's through livestock, but it's also a generator for the economy. And like it or not, our area of Western Maine and Carroll County in New Hampshire right over there relies very, very heavily on those tourists coming up. They can do things like tube and canoe. So, yeah, question.
Well, it's not really a question, but I learned a little bit about this. Since my dad, he loves Saco's pretty much a
Yeah.
center, and it's like a real problem in the summers now, and it's like really like last year there was a lot of business.
Did everyone hear what?
No, can't hear her at all.
Say that again real loud. That's like a real world example. Do you mind saying that again real loud?
My dad runs Saco Canoe Rental Company in Tubing, and last summer he ran out of a lot of business because the water was so low.
Yeah. Right? That's like affecting real people that you go to school with. You know, like real people in Mesa. So, I unfortunately, and this is my one big regret right now for this year, is that I wish we had 2 more classes. Because I kind of feel like we're ending this academic portion of the year on kind of a bummer, right? Kind of a down note. I'm like, let's go to all these places and let me tell you how awful it's going to be. And so, if we had 1 more class, what we would look at is we look at ways to remediate and stave off the effects of climate change. What's interesting is in a lot of those graphs that I showed you, a lot of those projections are for about in the next 50 to 60 years. Which sounds like a long time, but it's important to remember that's your lifetime. You know, when you are your grandparents' age, a lot of those projections are projected to happen. So that's you. It's very, very likely that in your lifetime you are going to see a very drastic change. And so, one of the things I would love to do if we had one more class is talk about ways that we can mitigate climate change and that we can reverse it, and that we can at least hold off on some of those extremes. Because it is still possible, right? I mean, the climate is changing. There will be change, but it is possible to at least mitigate and hold off the worst of the projections. And so if we had another class, I'd love to get into some of those things. But I will say that some of the best examples of doing that are things that we did today. Number one, just educating yourself about it. And number two, we bike to all these places, right? We're on bikes. We're eliminating some of that fossil fuel output. So my hope is that for next year, these 6th and 7th graders, we can get into a little bit of this, actions, personal actions we can take to reduce our impact in regards to climate change. I think a big part of it when you're in middle school is because you are not of voting age, you're not of working age, you can't sit on a town council, you can't run for president. There's a lot of things you can't do. I think it's good to talk about things that you can do. And the number one thing is just become more informed and find out what's happening, what's the cause behind it, what are the effects. And then as you grow older and have the ability to make those changes, you can choose to or not. Alright, the next time I see you, which is next Thursday, we are going to, all of us again, are going to get on 2 buses and we are going to make our way out the Kank, right, the Kangamargus Highway, Route 112, and we are going to go for an all-day hike. We are headed up Hedgehog Mountain. There's some beautiful views. It's a great spot and a lead-in for what we'll be talking about next year. And basically what we're going to be looking at, it's mostly a hike, but we'll be stopping a few times to kind of point out 3 things. And that is how people initially saw the woods as a wilderness to be conquered, as a scary place to be conquered, right? A wilderness that needed to be conquered. 2, later, how they saw it as a resource to be used. And then 3, finally, as an area to be protected. And there's some great vantage points with beautiful views that illustrate all 3 of those different ideas as we do that hike. I am most likely in the next day or 2 going to send your teachers a kind of like a packing list, a gear list, so you have an idea of what you should have with you for that all-day hike. But it's going to be things like 2 liters of water, good tennis shoes or hiking boots, right? Sunscreen, a backpack, lunches, and then some light layers. But I'll try and get a packing list to you guys. We're going to plan to be out all day. It's about 4.5 miles, and it takes us, like I said, to some really nice viewpoints. Yeah.
What's that? What?
Are they allowed to put on their own sunscreen?
Yes.
I believe so. Yes, at the middle school level, yes.
Alright, I think that was a yes. Alright. Alright, it is 11:28.